Chapter 3 The Secret College. Entering an airport security checkpoint, the demarcation between landside and airside, passengers are asked to remove their shoes, unless they are not. Liquids were once unregulated, but now may be carried onto planes in a maximum of 3 small see-through containers. Anecdotally, toothpaste seems to be a borderline case, not quite liquid, and rarely in transparent packaging, and the 3-ounce rule is often ignored. Less noticeable protocols abound, for instance regarding when vehicles first enter surveillance as they approach the airport, which itself preferably sits at the end of its own highway on a wind-blasted step, like outside Denver. Potted plants are made of reinforced concrete, posts or bollards. Parking is tightly if fairly discreetly administrated, occasioning complex new constructions, because vehicles may contain weapons, or themselves be bombs, as under New York City's World Trade Center in 1993, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City in 1995, or the Marine Barracks in Beirut back in 1983, and admittedly in hostile territory. Like places, individuals are protected under a multitude of more or less opaque rules and procedures. Not all floors of a hotel are equal. Some lobbies and windows are suspect. Schedules and routes change suddenly and unannounced. People are vetted. There may be helicopters, expensive and high visibility, or hardened cars with follow cars, ubiquitous in some places, or soft cars, maybe alone, less noticed. Drivers are highly trained to evade, passengers to duck. Somebody watches, usually unobtrusively. It is like an onion with layers. As you get closer to the person being protected, security tightens, the head of a firm that provides close protection said, as if that were an explanation in and of itself. Who knows such things? Who creates such protocols, makes such rules? More subtly, how do they know or even guess what the rules should be? For what are these people training, and why train in this way as opposed to training for something else or in a different fashion? What do the people responsible for such things know they do not know? That is, what do they discuss amongst themselves en route to promulgating rules for the rest of us? The visible practices of security, along with the rest of the iceberg suggested by what is visible, imply a body of knowledge, expertise, areas of professional consensus, and therefore also disagreement. Security, including counterterrorism, is an expert enterprise. An expert discourse does not exist without experts, people with status as well as knowledge. Some people are authorized to speak and are listened to, accorded respect within the discourse. Joining in a security discourse requires one to be somehow accredited, in the first instance usually by successful service in some organization, a military service or a police force, for example. But joining a service provides only entry-level status. The latter stretches far higher. When one thinks of the career path for those in counterterrorism, one immediately thinks of service as an agent, or more likely an analyst with an intelligence agency. But, especially since 9/11, police forces around the world expanded their counterterrorism capability with new and older but swollen units. At the tip of the spear one finds various SWAT teams and, of course, the black-clad Special Combat Forces, elite, Tier 1, Special Forces units, such as the SAS or the Navy SEALs, have especially rigorous admission criteria and intense, prolonged training regimens. Combinations are possible, and as careers develop, prominent experience comes to be expected, in addition to affiliation with prestigious institutions. The CV, and there is a CV, should include items like Chief of Security at and/or Combat Service in, all of which is to say that security is professional and is in that sense modern. Most professionals, paradigmatically medicine and law, are creatures of the university. Would-be professionals are trained according to some curriculum and, if successful, are legally eligible to stand for full accreditation to the profession, to practice. While security experts may be university trained, intelligence officers commonly are, security as such is not an academic field and is indeed secret, as discussed later. And while universities may be elite and exclusionary, they are anything but secret. So the professional question becomes, which affiliations and what experiences mean what to those in the know? Rephrased, how are reputations gained and careers defined? In a multi-jurisdictional and international context, without a central authority, discussion of relative reputation is endless. Authority thus established, individuals may become plausible candidates for responsible positions that must be filled, as in other arenas. Consider the judiciary or a corporate board or a hospital or even a university administration. Ambitious and capable people show themselves fit to hold official, not incidentally prestigious, positions. Conversely and symbiotically, security institutions need officials. Personal ambition and organizational imperative are reciprocal drives, impelling the motor of bureaucratic rationalization forward, which is a more complex way of saying that security is a modern enterprise, the bureaucratic rationalization of violence, Weber at the margins of civil society. Such people in such contexts are, of course, this book's subjects. From outside, it is tempting but no real answer to dismiss security measures as mere security theater, signifying nothing, and thereby dismissing security professionals tout court. We think otherwise. Most obviously, sometimes security works. Attacks are prevented, foiled, contained. Threats are neutralized. These things happen. At the same time, it is true enough in an operating assumption of this book that government especially must be seen to do something after an attack, and nowadays with a view to imaginable attacks. Security is politically inevitable, and for the same reason, security measures have a public face. Displays of force are not least displays, and so there is indeed an element of the theatrical about much security. But taking the theater and security theater seriously, the question of what knowledge, held by whom, and with what authority, reemerges. Theater entails the play of meanings, both expressed and received. Who authors such meanings in such fashion as to be effective? Staging plays is a complex business, and hardly costless. Security measures are frequently inconvenient, slowing travelers, for instance. So how is what to do decided? According to what values and metrics? Even supposing it to be pure security theater, albeit with actual violent interventions, is it worthwhile for Her Majesty's government to keep a helicopter filled with SAS commandos aloft over London at all times, for random dramatic example? Mark asked a senior special forces operator, a legendary figure, about the UK's policy to deploy the SAS on a permanent basis over the capital. The operator thought that his government's policy was a ridiculous move, tactically ignorant, but he was really baffled at the lack of public outcry. This is the country that fought the Nazis and didn't sell its liberties, he declared. You see, he said, we are a tool shed, and every country worth its salt has a tool shed. They need us. But you don't want to leave the shed door open. Return to the demo described in the prologue. Security professionals from several different sorts of agency, military, intelligence, police, even some medical responders, and from various European countries, as well as politicians, corporate suppliers, and the occasional academic or other scholar, gathered to watch a demonstration of how a counterterrorism operation might work under certain plausible circumstances, and with what loss of life. This was indeed theater, intentionally staged, albeit as realistically as possible. The show was designed to be persuasive, to make arguments about threats and preparedness, about prowess and funding, and so on. That is, the staging dramatized certain aspects of security practice in Europe at the present time, not least sociological and professional aspects. For present purposes, thinking about security as a field of ethnographic inquiry, security culture for want of a better term, the demo highlighted ways in which security is a nervous and reactive milieu, in the castles and cannons fashion of military knowledge, responding to real and imagined moves by enemies. The milieu spans institutional and professional boundaries. That is, these are not isolated institutions, nor structured networks or even Deleuzian assemblages. In peculiar fashion, security seems to be a contemporary version of late medieval Europe's secret colleges. Experts of various sorts gather, discuss, argue, worry, debate relative reputations, decide, tacitly or not. We call this the secret college. Secrecy is an obvious difference between security and other professional discourses. Another is violence, discussed later. To be sure, security has no monopoly on secrecy. For medical doctors and lawyers, patient and client information is generally secret. In any number of businesses, information may be proprietary, and trading on it a crime. But these are secret aspects of businesses carried on in broad daylight. In contrast, by hypothesis, security information poses some danger, could be used by adversaries. Secrecy is at the core of security. The words are even etymologically related. Secret comes from Latin words for separation, sifting, keeping from knowledge or view. Security comes from the same Latin for separation from care, fear, or anxiety. Both words hark back to the Greek for idiot, person in a private station, without reputation, or even a fool. To be free from care, then, requires keeping things hidden, out of public view, private, secret. Descartes, the former soldier, say, Je m'avance caché, I go forward hidden. This is more than philological fun. This is how security works. Schedules change without notice and unannounced. Counter-terrorists fight in balaclavas. In the UK, disclosure of information about violent interventions is generally banned under the Official Secrets Act. Claims are made and neither confirmed nor denied, and so forth. The importance of secrecy, not just as a matter of professional ethics, but for people's safety, raises interesting questions. One frequently must be cautious about releasing potentially sensitive information. Consequences of the publication of information, seen and unforeseen, could be dire. On the other hand, and to be simple-minded, secrecy poses great potential for abuse. More positively, much can be learned from thinking and talking seriously about the security regimes under which we live, hence this book. In an effort to balance such considerations, we have written in broad and discrete terms, and this text has been vetted in several quarters. Although secrecy is central to security, there are more gray areas than one might expect. What is said and what is decided is more or less secret, sometimes more, sometimes less. Indeed, security cannot be completely secret. The secret college generates a great deal of knowledge, and even more policy and practice, founded on the professional consensus of the day. As with any other professional discourse, much of this learning is really only understandable to those with the experience, skills, or professional history to make sense of it. Such learning, however, must eventually be applied to places or people, and so become at least somewhat visible. Security professionals must address others, not least in order to tell them what to do, establish protocols, regulate the building of airports and the placement of bollards, and so forth and so on. In our work, under the right circumstances, we have found people quite willing to talk. Professionalism also carries with it professional pride and curiosity. The highly secretive U.S. Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, running several more or less covert wars, even publishes books. If one understands the world of security as a secret college, then one should not be surprised to find different faculties. In late 2011, Mark joined a counterterrorism training program at a major international airport. This is an extract from his notes on his first day of training. I turned up an hour early, which was fortunate because I spent that entire period of time trying to find a seminar room on the lower level of the airport. Eventually, I found a doorway with several large men standing outside, business suits, close-cropped hair, chatting with an air of impatience. Someone asked for my name and waved me into a room with a folder on every chair. I picked up a dossier and sat down. Seconds later, a man in a dark suit strode to the front of the room, rippling the atmosphere as he walked past. Suddenly the room was full, silent and intense. Right, he said. We're here to talk about yesterday's incident. He paused for emphasis. My pulse shot up, and I scanned the documents in the folder for clues. This could have been serious, he continued. A known threat, 3 airports, and no one flagged it. Apparently, the exact nature of the threat was none of my business. I was in the wrong room. A very large individual removed the folder from my hand and escorted me out of the conference. After about 5 minutes in the hallway, which seemed like an eternity, the large individual, who I abruptly realized was guarding me, stopped glaring, turned his back, and answered his mobile phone. The world of security is hierarchical and internally partitioned. My guard's milieu was policing protocols and compliance with aviation regulation. Another door, further down the corridor, led to a different room that was used by an operational counterterrorism unit, a very different world. Actual counterterrorism was, literally, none of his business. The phone call came from that room, and it had an immediate impact on his body. He tensed up, even more so, and turned to face me. Sorry, he said. Sorry, he said again more loudly, in the direction of a young man walking down the corridor towards us. The rather scruffy young man approached with, Don't worry about this lot. Glad to meet you. He escorted me away. During the seconds-long journey to the end of the corridor, and seemingly without any effort, he extracted most of my life history. Then he paused and put a hand on the back of my elbow. "If you don't mind," he said, "I've just one request. Just don't contradict me in front of the lads, even if you think what I'm saying is bullshit, yeah? This is my first day running the course." Much as a university comprises faculties, security includes various organizations, and each has a different function and history. The broad intelligence community stretches from background analysis to frontline operations in war zones, including targeted killing and other forms of direct action. Domestic homeland security reaches out to overseas military intelligence activities, but also works with specialist police units. Police work itself may entail everything from community approaches to reducing gang involvement to counterterrorism teams. Depending on the scene of the emergency, various armed responders may be authorized to engage. Medical professionals concern themselves with virtually battlefield scenarios. Security hardware is a huge business with specialized engineers. In the demo with which this book began, various faculties of the secret college came together for training against a marauding attack. Counterterrorism. Sometimes security fails, and the secret college reveals itself in other ways, more cultural and less institutional in character. To focus on the violent culture, no other word would do, of counterterrorism specifically, consider the following stories. On September 21, 2013, members of Al-Shabaab entered the affluent Westgate shopping mall and office building in Nairobi, Kenya, and started shooting. Almost immediately, the news circulated among security professionals on social media. L worked for a company that provided security corporate executives, including some with offices in the complex. L is a Western European professional soldier, a Tier 1 operator, with extensive experience in Iraq and Afghanistan under various commands. When he heard about the attacks on an operator's WhatsApp chat, he and his colleague immediately drove to Westgate to extract their clients. He gained entry through a loading deck, unarmed, evaded the marauding shooters, and successfully extracted the executive and his wife. He went back in repeatedly, and by discovering overlooked doors and passages, managed to shepherd many dozens of members of the public to safety. A citizen gave L his personal weapon, so he was able to return fire. CCTV footage of the first moments of the Al-Shabaab attack on Westgate Mall is utterly disturbing. Civilians ran, hid, were hunted down and murdered. Dozens fell where they stood, while others bled to death slowly next to their hidden relatives. Occasionally, one sees a terrified security guard. Later, private security and police attempt rescues, crouched down and peering around walls. Little wonder they were facing a small army live streaming a massacre. But the fleeting appearances made by L on the silent horror show suggest a different kind of security. He commandeers a weapon and immediately checks the action and ammunition. He moves differently. This is his profession. The horror show continued for 4 days, and many of the particulars are disputed. 6 years later, on January 15, 2019, members of Al-Shabaab entered the Dusit D2 complex. Dusit D2 was also in the Westlands neighborhood of Nairobi, just a few miles from Westgate. During a recent research trip to Nairobi, former operators guided us around the hotel and shopping complex, an utterly contemporary space in that it looks like the backdrop to a violent video game, with various expensive yet characterless buildings joined by walkways and bridges, apparently housing unexceptional activities. We stood on the lawn where a suicide bomber blew himself up. Perhaps his loud death was the signal for the shooting to begin. Our guides explained the Al-Shabaab tactics and their own reaction on hearing the first reports. Local police often befriend expatriate operators. It pays to know where such professionals are. Our guides then described what happened when word reached C, a relatively young but high-ranking Special Forces operator. C, they told us, was shopping nearby, driving in his own car, with his kit safely tucked away in the trunk. He drove to the site to inspect the security cordon and found none to speak of, not any effective effort to halt the massacre. Coincidentally, C and L had served in the same European Tier 1 unit. C fought his way through the complex, some 18 hours of combat, mostly alone. Hour after hour he merged with the civilians he rescued, pounded a bottle of water, and returned to his own front line. Local police, for the most part, let this professional be. Proof of kill pictures showing Al-Shabaab weapons and bodies were circulated on restricted social media. This is a world. There will be some people who are willing to turn from such violence, thankful that such events are rare and over there. Others will be troubled by the presence of dangerous professionals in a land not theirs. But the problem of the secret college is not to be dismissed on the basis of distance. Around the world, serious crime and terrorism are met with tactical response from so-called SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics teams. In the U.S., from 1972 to 2018, paramilitary-style drug raids, carried out by similarly equipped and dressed SWAT teams, increased by 26,665%. Moreover, the so-called Pentagon pipeline funnels significant quantities of military equipment to civilian law enforcement. Striking examples include the purchase by Kennett, Missouri, population 10,932, of an MRAP mine-resistant vehicle. The leading cause of unnatural death in Kennett is drowning in a swimming pool when drunk. SWAT policing is actually a rather old model and hardly purely American. Much of the essence of SWAT policing was invented in colonial laboratories like turn-of-the-century Ireland, the Auxiliary Division with its cohort of ex-World War I heroes, and 1920s and 1930s Shanghai, where modern SWAT techniques were perfected by British Lieutenant Colonel William E. Dan Fairbairn, a man who inserted himself into no fewer than 666 shooting incidents, and Eric Sykes, a professional hunter, arms salesman, and police sniper. During World War II, Fairbairn and Sykes operated a secret college where they revolutionized the close-quarters combat used by Allied secret intelligence services and special forces, and after the war, they left an influential legacy in manuals such as the U.S. Marine Corps' Kill or Be Killed. Their legacy was also hugely influential in Los Angeles following the Watts riots in 1965, the event that led to the special weapons and tactics teams that we know today, teams that were originally a counterinsurgency force. In 1969, SWAT officers became embroiled in a 4-hour shootout with members of the Black Panthers, and in 1974 they engaged the Symbionese Liberation Army on Compton Avenue. In the 10 years after the Watts riots, the number of SWAT teams in the United States increased from 1 to 500. Soon, every town wanted one. Today, most U.S. cities have a SWAT team, even Middleburg, Pennsylvania, with a population of just over 1,300 persons and very little crime. In Fairplay, county seat of Park County, Colorado, a town of less than 1,000 people, David overheard a SWAT team commander talking shop with a fellow policeman over breakfast. This might seem a little surreal, and it is, but Colorado is where the influential Columbine High School shooting happened in 1999. Columbine, a stunningly beautiful alpine flower, came to mean something else, left 15 dead, and popularized not only tactics but also a style of violent performance. A few years later, up the road in Aurora, Colorado, Ph.D. candidate James Holmes interrupted the screening of a Batman movie, The Dark Knight Rises, by standing on stage and firing into the audience. It was reported that, when arrested, Holmes claimed to be the Joker, a claim made plausible by the fact that Holmes had dyed his hair to match that of the Batman character. This claim was later disputed. In Park County itself, the Platte County High School suffered a hostage crisis in which 7 female students were taken hostage and sexually assaulted. One of the hostages was murdered. The assailant shot and killed himself. Members of the SWAT team also shot the assailant. During the drafting of this chapter, a young woman traveled to Colorado, purchasing a weapon and advertising her intention to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Columbine. She shot herself in the mountains to the west of the Denver without killing anyone else. A few weeks later, a pair of students entered a school in Jefferson County, Colorado, a few miles from Columbine, and shot 9 students, killing 1. Such stories can be read in many ways. From some perspectives and with some denominators, these stories are anomalies for all their horror. For example, the federal uniform crime reports are clear that from the 1970s onwards, the number of police officers feloniously killed in the United States has declined by some 80%. One may find other statistics indicating the outbreak of peacefulness. Over roughly the same time, however, SWAT deployments have increased by over 900%, and 80% of all such deployments are to execute warrants. On the other hand, in Park County, according to the 2010 census population 16,206, the Sheriff's Department's effort to execute an eviction notice in the winter of 2016 resulted in a gun battle which left 1 sheriff's deputy dead and 2 others wounded, 1 critically. The tenant was killed. Perhaps such things are mere expressions of Americans' violent culture. Maybe there is something about Colorado, almost heaven, it seems. But again, this is a nervous, reflexive milieu, which can be and is understood in many ways. At any rate, one of the things that has happened is the adoption of SWAT policing. America is less exceptional in this regard than Europeans might assume. SWAT is a policing hammer, and the whole world is filled with nails. Terrorism in 1970s Europe amplified a trend towards specialist policing, and the same is true for most major cities around the world. SWAT tactics can be tools of political repression. For example, in 2015, Brazilian anti-corruption police swooped in to arrest members of Rio de Janeiro's famed Special Police Operations Battalion as part of Operation Black Evil. Several senior officers who enjoyed the status of heroes thanks to a series of hit Elite Squad movies were charged with offenses ranging from distribution of narcotics and weapons to extrajudicial murder. Lines grow fuzzy when one wears a balaclava to work. Even a relatively benevolent sovereign, however, might find itself acquiring hitherto wartime special forces capacities for ordinary domestic use. If the worst case happened, and there was no SWAT team, no explanation would suffice. That said, the seemingly inexorable rise of SWAT-style teams internationally is hard to explain satisfactorily. Key drivers seem to include the risk aversion of mainstream police authorities, competition between authorities and governments, and the dense networks that exist, especially in the realm of counterterrorism secret colleges, urging best practices, that is, enhanced capabilities. As a result, many countries have counterterror teams drawn from police close quarters combat groups and military special forces. For present purposes, the point is that it is now normal to be able to deploy military-grade force at very short notice in the supposedly civilian heart of the societies that regard themselves as most advanced, somehow beyond violence. Maybe precisely because these societies are so advanced, their violence is generally highly professionalized, hence the secret college. Developing countries, however, may present a different picture. Despite numerous devastating attacks by al-Shabaab, Kenya's ability to respond to terrorist events has been repeatedly criticized as not just ineffective, but unprofessional, not least by the Kenyans themselves. To extend the analogy slightly too far, contemporary security practice recapitulates the medieval and modern story in which the university creates a professional caste. The extent to which a society could afford a good university and consequently sophisticated professionals was, and is, a point of national pride. In the same vein, our Praetorian Guards have, if not degrees in kinetic force, at least elaborate credentials, meaningful to those in the know. Which is not to say that security professionals are uniform. Quite the opposite is the case. As noted above, security comprises dozens of different jobs. Even within the relatively specialized domain of counterterrorism, operatives are trained and serve in different units in various countries, and though elite, are nonetheless a fraction of security forces. Security forces more broadly are of various types and all must function in broader public, political, economic contexts, each with their own authorities. As one would expect of any group comprising members of different professions, guilds or castes or other elites, there are endless discussions of prestige, priority, what forms of respect are owed to whom, which house or fraternity is better, or, sometimes importantly, in operational control. In an actual event, much depends on the particular configuration of services in that jurisdiction. For example, an attack in London would trigger an alert to nearby police. But depending on the severity of the incident, the alert might also elicit a response from nearby armed officers or from the highly trained counter-terror officers of SO-19. In the most severe cases, the response might come from above, literally, if control is yielded to the black-clad troops in the Special Air Service, SAS, helicopter that keeps a permanent watch over the city. In Paris, a vertical line can also be traced for an unarmed municipal police on the ground to raid the elite tactical unit that has a rather fiendish-looking Black Panther as its logo. Mordant humor aside, around the world, men and a few women, very few in this overwhelmingly male workplace, talk daily about events that have happened and train to intervene in events that have not yet happened. The milieu is composed of adjacent specialists, shadowy government and intelligence officials arrayed against terrorists who are somewhere out there plotting atrocity. Formally independent high-level international counterterrorism units exist in a dense professional world. Units train with one another. Neighboring military units, such as the SAS and the Irish Rangers, have long-standing agreements for staff exchange. Police close quarters combat groups such as GSG-9 in Germany, SO-19 in London, and France's RAID regularly participate in each other's training, sharing best practices. They even have their own Special Forces Olympics. Personnel may on occasion move from one unit to another in a different capacity. Ex-SAS operators, for example, are in high demand. Retired operators may take on consultancy roles, hiring others for overseas corporate contracts, sometimes working for arms and equipment companies. Though this is not high in prestige, but rather is categorized as profitable sales work. Some sales, of course, are made to state purchasers, the circular flow of security. Over the course of a career, talented individuals may serve in more than one nominally national military, either directly or as contractors of various sorts. To speak of guilds would be to go too far, yet attendance at secret college events is for members only. There, units share knowledge, people, events, memories, and expertise. Professional learning comprises and informs some set of practices, law or medicine, or, we argue, security. Indeed, makes those practices, understood as professions, possible. The secret college shapes all sorts of work, but is more dramatically realized as one approaches the tip of the spear among those whose job it is to use lethal force, from close combat teams to special forces, the elite graduates, as it were. Unsurprisingly, they drink together. European operators might be overheard describing some historical mass shooting event in serious tones before nudging an American colleague with, "I suppose you'd call that an average Tuesday." These jokes work because the world described here is one where comparison is everything. Tactics are compared, training, every potential move and countermove, every detail is considered, debated, and discussed. As the ancient Roman historian Josephus used to say of the legions, their training is bloodless battles. Battles are bloody training. In the summer of 2015, the great debate in a training center bar was where to place 3 rounds in a hostile. The North Americans favored 2 in the chest, 1 in the head. The Europeans scoffed. Always put 1 in the groin. Work your way up. They'll have bled out by the time you hit their head. 1 year later, a large group gathered angrily at the same bar to discuss how to respond to a Central European instructor who described moving a hostage rescue unit down the aisle of an aircraft side on to increase speed. "Fool," one of the operators declared in earshot of the instructor. "Now we need body armor for our armpits." All of that said, many aspects of the culture are cosmopolitan and frankly sophisticated. Individuals expect one another to have refined opinions on current and past security events, peppered with a disdain for lowbrow xenophobia or racism, biases which suggest no real effort to understand the professional issues at hand. Conversation tends to slide back to tactical matters. Indeed, this is the realm of tactics, and one can imagine counterterrorism training as a contemporary martial arts mastery, a diasporic world of secret colleges in which people train constantly with one eye on the style and techniques of rival masters. To be clear, this enterprise is about the delivery of kinetic force, more colloquially called killing. Comfort with confrontation and violence separates the secret college from society at large, and further separates counterterrorism forces from those positioned lower down the ladder. Within counterterrorism and special operations more generally, what separates the tiers is cognitive speed and physical prowess. A former SAS trooper put it this way: "It's not just about hours putting down rounds at the range. Lots of people do that. My business is killing, so when I shoot, I'll kill you every time. I never miss." Comfort with, or even preparedness for, violence subtly mischaracterizes the stance of counterterrorism operators, the sort of people that one former Special Forces soldier called capable individuals. Programmed is too mechanistic. Studies have shown, for example, that police officers with combat experience are less likely to fire their weapons than policemen who have no military service. That said, the point of all the training is to make fighting almost automatic. Professional responses to armed attacks exhibit very little of the confusion and variety that characterize the public under attack. No hesitancy about what to do, no gathering of courage, no deciding rather unpredictably on doing this or that. Extensive training allows prior tactical thinking, done in the secret college and instilled through practice, to become reflex, second nature, so that it can be executed without much thought. Even in training, a Tier 1 operator has faced intense conflict and physical aggression. If he has seen actual combat, so much the better. The well-trained veteran is as certain as one can be of responding to violence with fortitude and skill. Actions like the Westgate and Deucet II interventions by individuals with extensive Special Forces training and combat experience exhibit great courage and prowess, no doubt, the exercise of which takes a profound toll. In the event, however, violent performances are largely on autodrive, second nature, the fruit of years of intense practice and even actual experience, as well as innate aptitude. In a fight, Tier 1 operators have more time to think than other people because they need to think or worry about less. They know what to do, and they are confident, proud, arrogant, in their will and ability to do so, the bravado of the warrior remarks since the dawn of literature. Maybe short to medium-term decisions must be made, perhaps analogous to a driver deciding where to go, but little or no thought is required about what to do right now or how to do it, much like an experienced driver does not think about the act of driving. Asked what made men like him different, one former paratrooper said, "I have a reset button. When things are going crazy, I can stop and think about what needs to be done." This point must not be overstated. As noted, violence often takes a serious toll, even on those who are very good at it. The U.S. military in recent years has lost more personnel to suicide than to its adversaries. Here is David's account of a first meeting with a Tier 1 operator after combat. It was not long after the terrorist attack and the devastating counterattack mounted by B, who is now even more renowned. There were concerns about international ramifications. Members of the secret college made calls on our behalf. B agreed to meet us in the lounge bar of a very exclusive and remarkably dark hotel. Shadows and expensive wood, the sort of place that guests who did not want to be seen and did not mind paying would go. Apart from the barman, and then later some guys who were in town selling arms, and some women who seemed to be prostitutes, we appeared to be the only guests. B was there when we arrived, sitting in a corner. He was of average height and build, that is, smaller than I expected. He moved comfortably and was obviously fit, but he was not particularly imposing. It was strange, as a once very athletic man not yet old, knowing that the fellow shaking your hand and standing a little close, maybe, could kill you so quickly, no question. B introduced himself politely, and we sat down. I asked what he was drinking, the local cocktail with honey. I ordered one. He was anxious, tired, very, very tired, preoccupied. Quick little movements, a touch disconcerting. B talked a bit with another Tier 1 operator, one of our liaisons, sitting across. They talked about his fighting gear. Back to tactics. The standard for urban combat? Kit should be leaner, B seemed to be maintaining, although he'd obviously been sufficiently lethal with the tools he had. I was not quite sure what B wanted more or less of, but I did not want to interrupt for clarification. And why would I care, apart from idle or slightly morbid curiosity, about the details of a fighter's gear? For that matter, what did I want to know? How they died? How he felt? What he thought about the strategic or social context? Here it was, the chance to talk to the tip of the spear, and there was very little to say. So I just sat there next to him in the deep chairs in the corner of the shadowy lounge, drank my exotic drink, and listened, keeping an eye on the others. And then two things happened, both strange. Gradually, B started talking quietly, sitting side by side. His head was less than 3 feet from mine. We knew who he was and roughly what he had done, but who were we? What were we doing? He seemed genuinely interested, but also wary, understandably. The general situation, and his personal and professional situation, was delicate. He had been assured that we were cool, discreet, not journalists or anything. So he had agreed to meet us in the first place. I told him what we were about this book, in effect. You can't con an honest man. As Mark noticed, he wanted to talk, to me. Gradually, he began to talk some about his experiences, general aspects of his service in various parts of the world, his background, what Kipling would call the regiment, that was, in some deep way, his home now. The second thing that happened, even stranger, was that I felt oddly protective of B. Obviously not physically, but somehow existentially. Even dangerous people, maybe especially dangerous people, need... B left relatively early, nervously. without being melodramatic, yet somehow bothered. We drank till quite late with the arms dealers and other security types who had wandered in or come with us. But B and I would talk more at other bars in lighter moods, elaborate songs and toasts over email mediated through the secret college. Security concerns abound, and we live in very different worlds. I cannot say that B and I are friends, but in other circumstances we might be. When asked what sets Tier 1 operators apart, one said, "We don't stop. Dogged will, even more than skill or strength or bravery in the ordinary sense, seems to typify elite fighters." B did not say this, but the description certainly fits him. Short of killing such a man, putting his name on the tower, as the essayists say of their fallen, there is little way to stop him. But dogged expenditures of energy are, in some deep literal sense, exhausting. They deplete the resources, drain the well on which they draw, leaving the man nervous, empty, tired. We professors can talk like this in part because we are older. Also, it is not our fight. We are not only excused from fighting, but are generally expected to denounce such things. The operator's stories, usually involving death, are laden with non-judgments to the effect of good, bad, or indifferent, so as not to interrupt the flow of the narrative, or perhaps to avoid casting moral doubt on themselves, friends, or comrades. These are stories driven by action, often as a way of demonstrating character and even virtue, especially bravery and skill. Sometimes even the bravery and skill of guys on the other side, like the professional Chechen sniper who would have his client set up a nest in advance in a high-rise, preferably under construction, with his weapon and a forensic suit. He would enter the building unarmed, take the elevator to the room, put on the suit, kill, take off the suit, and exit, leaving no trace, free to travel from country to country, clean at the borders. Or so it was said. Big balls in this extremely male world. In such stories, purpose, motive, justification are not so much abstracted away as merely presumed. From the counterterrorist perspective, that sniper's job is to kill our guys. Our job is to kill him and other bad guys. It is not our job to consider whether the adversaries are actually bad guys, whether we are any better, what other options might exist. The only questions are tactical and almost aesthetic. What actions, what people are worthy of admiration? Like any professionals, security professionals must presume the virtues of their profession, to which they've committed so much. Within the more limited domain of counterterrorism, where the enterprise is violence, the culture is not only professional, but heroic in a Homeric sense. Achilles spent little time worrying about the Greek cause. He cared about his honor, even more than his life. The politics of their world, at least operators will say when asked, are simple. Their world exists to shelter our world. We protect you while you sleep. Their we exists relationally then, with an evil people active in the shadows on one side, and with you, the rest of us, in innocent slumber on the other side. At present, serious concerns about militarization, radicalization, and mass intrusions into privacy, to say nothing of the meaning of citizenship, bureaucracy, and governance, are justified. In this light, how the twilight realm of security operates vis-a-vis the public, and their empathetic distance from one another, should matter to all. But what is the public for purposes of this discussion? To that question we now turn.